Since time immemorial, humankind has looked to the stars. The universe has always been a source of fascination and of mystery. How was the cosmos born? What else might the universe contain? And where do we come from? Since the beginning, humanity has dreamt about flying into space. Myths and legends were formed around the idea of space travel and astronauts, just as fast as the rockets that were eventually launched into the skies. Many were skeptical and filled with doubt. They did not want to believe that humans could leave Earth and explore outer space. Welcome to Spacetime, featuring astronaut and scientist Ulrich Walter and an expert on surprises the universe has in store for us. From extraterrestrials to absurd conspiracy theories about NASA, in our enlightened and digitized world, it is the internet that has provided the purveyors of fake news and invented stories with a means of mass dissemination.
About 100 years ago, man first began to conquer the air and then outer space. These pioneers were accompanied by both myth, legend, and of course, conspiracy theories.
We Come in Peace is the subtitle of the 2012 comedy about space Nazis Iron Sky. The Finnish director Timo Vuorensola elaborates on a conspiracy theory that has circulated since the fall of the so-called Third Reich. Thanks to their supposedly superior technologies, the Nazis escaped Earth and hid in a distant place, in this case, the Moon. From there, they eventually try to conquer the world again. The Moon has always been a source for humanity's fantasies. July 16th, 1969, 13:32 Universal Time. Apollo 11 departs from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. Destination, the Moon. 3 US astronauts are on board: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. After 3 days, they reach the celestial satellite. And Neil Armstrong becomes the first human to step onto the Moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Their footprints in the moon dust mark the beginning of a controversy that lasts until today.
The mother of all conspiracy theories is undoubtedly the moon hoax. According to conspiracy theorists, the moon landing never happened. The footage was thought to be created by NASA on some Hollywood sound stages. Filled with special effects and movie magic, it was meant to deceive the public. They argue that if one was to look closely, one would only see a skyline that was completely black and lacked any stars. Should one not be able to see stars? In addition, the American flag swayed back and forth once it was placed by the astronauts. This could only have happened if wind was present, a condition that was clearly created inside a studio. Furthermore, the rocket would have had to fly through the Van Allen belt, a radioactive belt that would have killed the astronauts once they passed through it. Those are the arguments. So, is there any truth to them?
There is almost no event in human history that brought forth so many wild speculations as Neil Armstrong's step onto the moon's surface, along with the other 11 US astronauts that followed. US President John F. Kennedy marked the beginning of the conquest of the moon during a speech at Rice University in Houston, Texas, on September 12, 1962.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
With the space program, Kennedy chose to grab the bull by the horns. During the race into space, the Russians outran the Americans for years. The Soviet Union, launched the first satellite into orbit in 1957, and with Yuri Gagarin, the first human into space in 1961.
Everything is working normally. Everything is working according to plan.
The Cold War now extended into orbit. Military dominance, technology, and plenty of prestige were at stake. It became a battle between two superpowers and their worldviews. The US space program was supposed to turn the tide in favor of the Americans. The Western world was not able to or did not want to imagine a communist moon. This struggle for dominance in space is one of the most important achievements of American determination.
Back then, we witnessed a great struggle, a political race. If the Americans had not gotten there, Russia had the technology to verify that there was no landing. At the very least, they must have had a capsule orbiting the moon. That's what the Russians were sure of. If the Americans actually landed, set foot on the moon, and returned home safely, that can be confirmed from Earth by locating their radio transmissions. One can pinpoint the exact location where that transmission came from.
The Soviet Union would not have missed the chance to embarrass its political enemy by exposing a fake moon landing, but the Russians never challenged it. The communist press reported the landing, though reluctantly, perhaps.
One also has to mention that there are around 400,000 people working on the Apollo program, a fact that's easily verifiable. Not only would one have to bribe a lot of people, more importantly, one would have to silence the Russians, as they were observers, so to speak. The greatest enemy of the U.S. was also a witness to its success. It's rather unlikely that the Russians would have stayed silent for 50 years.
One of the arguments most widely reported is the alleged fluttering flag on the moon. The flag was in fact held upright by a strut. This was done to keep it from hanging off the pole like a wet rag and to produce a more impressive picture. As Apollo 15 astronauts inserted it into the ground, it began swaying back and forth. This gave birth to the conspiracy theorists' myth of the fluttering flag inside a studio. Over time, the denialists have developed an almost religious fervor.
These ideas have always existed, but they have never been as well organized as they are today. And this reality has had a very peculiar effect. Accessing information and knowledge is easier now than it has been at any other moment in history. However, that ease of access also means that propagating conspiracy theories, or to put it in softer terms, alternative worldviews, is also much easier. Rather than being confined to the margins of social discourse, there is now a platform on which these kinds of ideas can be exchanged and amplified. For example, if I have a personal theory about something and am exposed to diverse perspectives, I might be persuaded to change my view. On the other hand, if I confine myself only to perspectives from the extreme right or left and dismiss any evidence that challenges my view, I should not be surprised if my perspective becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until my whole world can only be seen through a set of self-imposed blinders.
The conspiracists live in a bubble, dissenting views are rejected, facts have no value and are in fact often misrepresented, giving rise to new conspiracy theories.
These days, there are photos of the landing sites. Probes made the footprints visible. We can really see the old landing sites. Even so, conspiracy theorists say that these are, of course, pictures that were manipulated after the fact, just like everything else. You will never be able to convince conspiracy theorists. For those with an open mind, however, the evidence is overwhelming. I do feel sorry for the astronauts who actually were on the moon and have to endure these discussions.
NASA was initially unaware of how widespread the conspiracies were becoming. As far as the scientists, engineers, and astronauts were concerned, these were only the ramblings of a few fringe groups.
For a long time, NASA did not respond to accusations that the moon landing was staged, but eventually it was forced to hire the renowned space travel journalist James Oberg. He was given the task to report counter-evidence, but the media thought it was beneath the dignity of NASA to have to defend itself this way, and James Oberg's assignment was retracted. The conspiracy theorists saw this as a victory, evidence that everything had been faked. This became a continuous back and forth. But what did the astronauts have to say about this? They felt there was no room for discussion. Of course we went to the moon, no question about it. And then there was the unusual story of Buzz Aldrin, who also walked on the moon. He was confronted by a documentary filmmaker in broad daylight in Beverly Hills. The filmmaker, who was quite familiar with the issue, accused Aldrin of being a thief and a coward and challenged him to swear on the Bible that he indeed went to the moon. Buzz Aldrin reacted in a surprising manner. He simply gave the man a right hook to the chin and walked on.
So what was the source of these conspiracy theories? NASA had been hailed for its achievements for years. But in 1976, Bill Kaysing, an until then unknown author, wrote a book titled We Never Went to the Moon. Kaysing worked for a NASA supply firm as a writer of operational manuals. That was the extent of his expertise. Despite this fact, once the book was published, there was no stopping the rumors.
I wonder why the U.S. always seems to be the sole target of these conspiracy theories. Maybe it's because the U.S. image is so connected to the Hollywood film industry. If they wanted to, it is conceivable that a movie studio could convince us of almost anything.
As a matter of fact, Kaysing's fairy tale of a fake moon landing provided inspiration for Hollywood. In 1978, director Peter Hyams told the story of a staged landing on Mars, which took place in a movie studio. In his movie, Capricorn 1, NASA representatives planned the elaborate deception when they realized that it would be impossible to send a manned mission to a neighboring planet.
We are T-minus 18 seconds from liftoff. We're T-minus 15 seconds.
Would you and your men please follow me?
What the hell is this?
This is an emergency. Please follow me now.
We have inboard engines 1, 0. We have a launch commit. We have a liftoff at 35 minutes after the hour.
Peter Hyams used original footage from NASA's Apollo program for his science fiction movie. Even the scenes of the fake Mars landing look rather similar to those of the real moon landing. So it was no wonder that Capricorn 1, a thriller about a staged Mars mission, added fuel to the debate about a possible conspiracy by NASA.
However, a single people.
There is some rather solid evidence that we were actually on the moon. For example, there are the moon rocks, which the astronauts brought back to Earth, roughly 400 kilograms. These are not just ordinary rocks. They contain the volatile helium-3, an element that was deposited inside the rocks by solar winds. We can actually observe that. The Americans aren't the only ones who have these rocks in their possession. The Russians have them too. They were able to retrieve moon rocks with their unmanned missions to the moon. The Russians confirmed that both samples of rocks match. A wonderful proof in my opinion. Yes, we were obviously there.
Humans have walked on the moon, but have extraterrestrials set foot on Earth? Millions of people believe this. The first sightings of unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, were registered in the late 19th century, around the same time that humans were developing air travel. Aliens would have to cross immense distances to visit us on Earth. Alpha Centauri, the closest galaxy to ours, is located about 4.3 light-years away.
If an extraterrestrial was truly able to bridge the gigantic distances of the universe, then my first reaction would be fear, simply because their knowledge would have to be so much greater than ours. They would have to be so much more developed. If I were to translate this into an evolutionary context, if we were lucky, they would see us the way we see chimpanzees. Though, based on our intellectual capacity, it's more likely they would compare us to our dogs.
UFO sightings of every kind are all over the internet. These objects appear as saucers, spheres, or flashes of light. Yet most of the footage is blurry and shaky, despite the fact that we live in an age where every mobile phone is capable of taking high-definition video. Regardless of the enormous number of sightings of alleged alien vessels, to this day we do not have any evidence that extraterrestrial life has actually visited us. The internet has also become the perfect stage for those claiming that they were abducted by aliens.
There have always been people with imaginative beliefs about things. If I believed that I was being taken aboard a spaceship at night to be experimented on, my beliefs would be filtered through the diverse perspectives around me. I would have friends to my right and my left that would challenge and question my certainty of the events. Maybe you just had a bad dream, they would say. But now I can find forums on the internet with people who believe the same things I do. Someone might be in Kazakhstan, another in the US, and someone else right here in my neighborhood. This results in a completely new situation. All of these people discuss an issue only among themselves, and by doing so create something unique that we call a filter bubble. If your neighbor on your left or right now asks you things like, "How was it for you last night when they took you?" "Well, for me it was like this," then your perception of reality is becoming more and more distorted. The greatest problem with the filter bubble is that your natural ability to evaluate different perspectives is lost. Let's say I'm using my PC. I would likely receive offers for yoga-related items. Nothing negative about that. It simply means that my lovely wife, who is very interested in yoga, has probably used my computer. I will get suggestions for yoga travels, yoga classes, and so on, because she probably bought some kind of book. In other words, the truth of what I'm exposed to on the internet is shaped by the searches I did beforehand. Therefore, if I was to explore only some kind of conspiracy theory, I would only receive articles related to that. Eventually, I would assume that this is the actual reality of the outside world.
Project SETI approaches the search for alien intelligence from a strictly scientific perspective. Astronomer Frank Drake was the first to use radio telescopes in an attempt to intercept signals from outer space.
There was this Ohio wow signal. It was recorded in the 70s and is called that because the person noting the signal wrote "wow" beside it on the computer printout.
Wow.
This eventually led to the event's widely used name. At the moment, we're searching all frequencies hoping to find a signal. But we've guessed which frequency is most likely to be used. The technical wavelength for neutral hydrogen is 21 centimeters. This is the wavelength that we are also sending out. And we are of the opinion that any alien life form would also have the idea of using the wavelength of hydrogen. The deciding factor of this story is the length of the signal and the shape of the curve. This should result in a curve that slowly rises, then becomes more intense, and then eventually decreases again slowly, all within a characteristic time frame. This is exactly what the signal looked like. Furthermore, it was very close to the 21-centimeter line. Obviously, there was a lot of excitement. Looking at it from today's perspective, one has to be more reserved about the results. We're now of the opinion that this was simply the result of an outbreak of gamma radiation.
At this point, scientists assume that there are billions of Earth-like planets within our galaxy alone. This makes it very probable that intelligent life exists elsewhere. And yet, for more than half a century, researchers have searched in vain for any signals from an alien civilization. The universe remains silent. The classic depiction of extraterrestrial life is of a Martian. For centuries, we have been fascinated by the notion that our neighboring planet could be inhabited by intelligent life. Usually, Martians are depicted as green beings with antennas on their heads, and at least in science fiction movies, they are almost always hostile. The fear of an invasion from outer space has been around for a long time. Aliens conquering the Earth to enslave the human race.
The fear of being discovered is deeply rooted within human nature, mostly due to our own history. What happened to those whom we discovered? There are utterly tragic examples. There is one thing history has taught us. It is much, much better to discover than to be discovered.
October 30th, 1938. The people of New York start to panic as they hear alarming reports on the radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars.
The account of a journalist who reported live from a farm in New Jersey led to mass hysteria.
The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost good heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. Oh yeah, I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that face,
The resolution came shortly afterwards. The alleged attack on Earth by Martians was nothing more than a radio play adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel War of the Worlds. His namesake, Orson Welles, a young American genius of cinema and theater, adapted the novel for radio. It was deceptively realistic.
I don't believe one would be able to spread something similar to Orson Welles' story today. If, hypothetically, some aliens did land on Earth today, everyone would instantly demand photos or videos. If there weren't any, we would say, well, that was nothing more than a joke.
Our neighboring planet has always stimulated our imagination. In 1964, a US probe sent pictures of the red planet back to Earth for the first time. Mars is not unlike Earth. It has a thin atmosphere and its surface is covered with rocks, sandy terrain and dunes. In 1976, when the probe Viking 1 transmitted a photo that clearly depicted a human face, a regular Mars fever erupted.
Many people interpreted this face as evidence of alien existence. It must have been artificially constructed. In this case, one must simply argue coincidence. Just like here on Earth, Mars has many areas of elevation and depressions. If one were to look at the structure of a face closely, one would be able to recreate such an appearance on the Mars surface simply by playing around with those formations. A different area would most likely result in other forms of different objects. This is purely coincidental. We simply tell our brain to interpret shapes in a specific way. We are trained to think in terms of patterns. If we see only the outline of a face, our mind will complete the shape, and therefore we don't even have to see the whole face in order to recognize it as such. We just have to see the contours and imagine the complete face. None of this is related to aliens. It is simply the product of random coincidences.
The debate over extraterrestrials is constantly revived by new footage of Mars. Artificial shapes are regularly spotted amongst rocks and cliffs. This appears to be more to do with psychology than geology. But it isn't just aliens and UFOs that have become the stuff of legends. The fact that humans were able to explore outer space has become the basis for myths. Questions are asked such as, is it possible for a person to survive in this hostile environment without a spacesuit?
Let's clear up some of the more common myths about space. For example, there's the question of what would happen to our bodies if we simply stepped into the vacuum of space. We've all seen it in the movies. I'm standing in front of the airlock. Suddenly the door opens. The common assumption is that my body will explode. But that would not be the case. The only parts of my body that could explode are those that have pockets of air. In other words, the lungs and the middle ears. But those gases could escape if I were to open my mouth. So there will be no explosion. In reality, my blood would start to boil after 6 seconds. Bubbles of gas would start to form, clog my arteries, and lead to the complete collapse of my circulatory system. However, I wouldn't notice any of this because there would still be oxygen in my blood. After 10 more seconds, I would begin to lose my vision due to the loss of blood in my retinas. After 5 more seconds, I would start to lose consciousness, a state that would prevent me from doing anything else. After another 2 to 3 minutes, I would finally suffer permanent brain damage. That would be the moment of my actual death. To summarize, I have about 20 seconds to take action in this situation.
In 1968, Stanley Kubrick played with this exact scenario in his science fiction masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. An astronaut briefly has to expose himself to the deadly vacuum of space without the protection of his helmet.
An organism would be capable of adapting to this scenario for a short time. I have contemplated this quite often. He ejects himself out of the capsule and is immediately able to close the emergency airlock. This is followed by the eventual buildup of air pressure. All of this would be conceivable. We can see foggy gases escaping at the very moment that he catapults out, which is exactly what would happen during rapid decompression. That would be caused by the condensation of humidity in the air. As the air pressure drops, the temperature of the air is lowered, and moisture turns into fog. I can therefore confirm that this is a realistic representation, even though I would hope no person will ever have to face such a situation. In my opinion, it would be possible to survive this for a few seconds.
Lots of myths surround spaceflight. Most of them aren't true. Teflon pans aren't the byproduct of space exploration, and astronauts do not carry cyanide capsules on them. There is, however, one story that is true. There are firearms on Russian spaceships.
If the Soyuz capsule had been docked at what was the Russian space station Mir, or was docked today at the International Space Station, the ISS, it would also function as a lifeboat. In other words, if there was a very serious emergency and the crew had to evacuate, they would probably have to land somewhere on this planet. That could be the ocean or some other remote region like the desert or the jungle or wherever else. For that reason, there's always a survival kit on board. Part of this survival kit is indeed a pistol. It would be possible that, I don't know, they had to touch down on an area where there were bears or other predators, and they might have to survive for several days. Perhaps more than 3 days or even a week until they were rescued. So it would be advantageous to have something that would allow them to hunt.
It is also true that there have been tourists on the space station, like the multimillionaire Anusha Ansari. Holidays in orbit, that may be a costly adventure, but it is not a space myth. But even space tourists can't leave the space station. The experience of a spacewalk remains strictly reserved for the professionals.
It's absolutely overwhelming. Obviously, there's a long period of preparation that comes before any external mission. Needless to say, there's a very small margin of error once you step outside, and then you exit on a sort of ladder that you attach yourself to with safety ropes. I stepped outside and turned around because I had to prepare myself to receive all the gear and equipment that we were supposed to install. As I turned around, I saw the outside of the space station as well as the sun that was rising on the horizon. Those are the moments that make you want to forget everything else. You just want to remain there for as long as possible while you enjoy taking this impression in. Obviously, one has no time for that.
The astronauts train for the missions outside the ISS in a tank of water. Floating in water simulates the conditions of zero gravity. Conspiracists use this underwater footage to disprove the existence of space stations. They claim that pictures taken in space are simply fakes that were produced by NASA inside a tank.
It's very difficult to refute a conspiracy theory because a conspiracy theorist will only allow for his own arguments. They claim their theories are completely correct, and anyone who tries to convince them otherwise is only using fake information. It's simply impossible to satisfy a conspiracy theorist when this kind of argument is being used. So it's difficult for a physicist to argue.
Some skeptics do believe in the existence of a space station. However, they suspect that NASA is suppressing video evidence of alien life forms.
It's possible to find pictures and even videos on the internet today that show blurry objects in space. The best known object is the so-called Black Knight, which was recorded from the space station. The video shows a dark object that is slowly turning in space. The hype on the internet is that people claim this to be an alien satellite which has been around for about 30,000 years. No, it isn't. There's a much simpler explanation. It's most likely an insulation mat from the space station. Most of the space station is covered by these isolation mats to protect it from solar radiation.
The first picture of the object was recorded during a US space shuttle mission in 1998. NASA published the photo, as it does all its recordings. For its fan community, Black Knight became proof of an alien visit. Others claim that it is part of a wreckage of an alien spaceship that exploded in 1955. There is no limit to the imagination. The idea that it could simply be space junk from the early years of the International Space Station is unacceptable for UFO hunters.
A conspiracy theory lacks any constructive element. It's impossible to extract anything positive, like a prediction of how something works, for example.
Rational thinking is also lacking when it comes to the so-called Roswell incident. The claim is that the wreckage and crew of an alien spaceship which crashed in New Mexico in 1947 has been hidden by the US military. In reality, the debris was part of a secret balloon project conducted by the Army.
The most interesting aspect surrounding the discussion of alien life is this. Let's say it's true. Aliens have traveled to Earth. At least, these aliens must be as technologically superior to us as the white man was to Indians. They would have solved all the problems of this vast universe. We know the theory of relativity is not totally wrong, and so it applies to aliens too.
The Mecca for UFO fans is located at Groom Lake on the edge of a salt desert in the US state of Nevada. Area 51 is a testing ground for the United States Air Force and the CIA. According to conspiracists, it serves only as a camouflage for a greater purpose: the study of extraterrestrial flying objects that have landed on Earth. The people at the base even have a laugh by projecting a laser show into the skies of Nevada to entertain UFO hunters.
Conceptually, the prospect of aliens landing on Earth is very, very unlikely. The amount of time it would take to travel such a vast distance is something to consider. I'm also pretty sure that if an alien was able to travel here, they could avoid crash landing in a desert somewhere in North America, a scenario that is commonly circulated. Ironically, they make it all the way here and then they fall from the skies. Maybe they have a learner's license on the back of their ships and are simply the novice pilots of these strange travelers. I can't say for sure. Some alien life form manages to trek all the way here from the constellation of a distant star just to crash upon arrival. I would consider this rather unlikely.
Grid Square 51, or Area 51 of the Nellis Air Force Base, is a remnant of the Cold War. Aircraft like the Lockheed A-12 were tested here, a CIA project that led to the development of the famous spy plane SR-71, or Blackbird. To this day, Grid 51 serves as a testing ground. This means that UFO hunters will continue to spot unidentified flying objects in the skies over Nevada in the foreseeable future.
The hype around flying saucers actually began in the 1950s. Back then, a pilot in the U.S. Air Force claimed that he saw 7 saucer-like objects while he was flying over a mountain range. That was the beginning of the craze, which led to sightings of saucers all over America.
Researchers and engineers actually did work on aircraft shaped like saucers. Around 1946, the Canadian firm Avro Canada began to develop the first concepts for disc-shaped airplanes. The US Air Force purchased the project in 1958 and conducted the first test flights. The device, nicknamed Avrocar, did not live up to expectations. The prototype was only able to rise about a meter above the ground. The program was eventually scrapped. Advances in air travel have always produced funny-looking vehicles. They're often strange, peculiar, and surreal in appearance. To some, they might even appear alien. Not surprisingly, UFO sightings are always a reflection of their time.
There were television shows which introduced new shapes and then reported shapes of UFOs changed in response. This is not unlike the fresco of Giotto. He painted an asteroid that had a tail. After that, everyone believed that asteroids had tails. Now, every Christmas, we all see asteroids with tails. This is all nonsense at the end of the day. However, I'm certain of this. One can never underestimate the power of imagery. It's something that invades our brains and most certainly influences our way of thinking.
A similarly enduring myth concerns flying saucers that were supposedly developed by the so-called Third Reich. The idea of the Reichsflugscheibe can be found in many, although mostly disreputable, publications. For many freaks, however, this is sufficient proof that this aircraft, which had revolutionary flight characteristics, actually existed. The rumors around the flying Nazi saucer began in the early 1950s and were triggered by the UFO hysteria in North America. Conspiracy theories surrounding Hitler's flying, spinning top continue to spread to this day. The fairy tales repeatedly spread by extreme right-wing UFOologists were so grotesque and bizarre that they became the basis for the Finnish science fiction comedy Iron Sky. The film tells the story of the Nazi elite who escaped to Antarctica aboard their flying discs. From there, they set off into space, where they colonized the dark side of the moon.
Let us leave all of these UFOs and aliens behind and turn our focus to myths about the Earth. The most intriguing myth, in my opinion, is the hollow world theory. It states that Earth is hollow inside. How did we come up with this? The first person to make that claim was the famed astronomer Halley, the very same who discovered Halley's Comet. He in turn based his theory on good old Newton, who apparently calculated that the Earth's mass was only 60% as dense as that of the moon. Ergo, the Earth had to be hollow inside. Over the centuries, this idea grew like wildfire and was further embellished. People eventually claimed that not only was the Earth hollow, it also housed another world on the inside, the so-called hollow world. This world even had its own sun, which was located at the very center of the Earth. Even later, it was proclaimed that there were entry points to this hollow world via the poles. And then there's another wonderful myth. Our Earth is flat as a pancake.
The image of the Earth as a disk can be found in many early cultures and creation myths. In antiquity, the concept of a flat Earth had already been abandoned. The world was depicted as spherical quite early on. The Greek scholar Eratosthenes was already able to calculate Earth's circumference as early as the 3rd century BC. But the theory of a flat Earth has seen a resurgence over the last few years.
There are many people in this world who doubt the current physical theories of the universe, or who provide alternative theories. There is generally nothing wrong with that, as long as one is certain on how to prove or disprove these theories.
The followers of the flat Earth theory deny all evidence with cheerful overconfidence and stubborn conviction. A person who believes in a flat Earth has deliberately abandoned any given and obvious reality.
It's easy to understand why people might be attracted to the flat Earth theory. A sphere is a complex object. No beginning, no end. Flatness is simple. There's the horizon. That's all there is. Our lives have become increasingly complicated. I can see why people would be drawn to the simplicity of such an idea. The amount of knowledge and complexity we deal with on a daily basis is overwhelming. If one were to combine these fringe theories, eventually it would be easy to separate oneself from the world of science and evidence and create a world you actually want to live in. A world that is flat and that is simple to comprehend.
The disciples of flat Earth theory simply reject 2,000 years of discovery in the fields of science and astronomy. These discoveries are dismissed as part of a global conspiracy. Even our most obvious daily experiences which point to a round Earth are rejected.
Already the early sailors could see it. When I watch a ship that had moved away from the coast, that after about 10 kilometers the ship disappears behind the horizon, although you should be able to still see it. This ship seems to be submerged somehow. And that suggests the suspicion that there is somehow a corner. And that happens in every direction. If I look in any direction, after 10 kilometers, this ship seems to disappear at the horizon. And that suggests the suspicion that the Earth cannot be flat. Today we can prove it more precisely. We just get into a rocket and fly once around the Earth.
To some, the image of the Earth as a globe represents a conspiracy of epic proportions. But what is the motivation behind such a scam? Why would astronomers, physicists, mathematicians, or pilots and sailors, for that matter, spread such falsehoods? This question remains unanswered by flat earthers.
If you want to criticize science, regardless of your actual opinion on specific issues, if your main goal is to criticize the scientific establishment, then this provides you with further ammunition. Are there people who really believe the Earth is flat? I couldn't say. Perhaps it's just an attempt to erode the foundation of science as a whole.
The American inventor Mike Hughes is convinced the Earth is a disk. The professional chauffeur feels duped both by scientists and the media who depict the Earth as a globe.
What's happened is what I discovered, what I researched for 4 to 5, maybe 6 months, and I could not dismiss it, that the world, I believe, is honestly flat. It's probably like a Frisbee with turned-up edges.
To prove it, Hughes wants to fly into space with a home-built rocket. After several failed attempts, Mad Mike was able to launch towards Earth's orbit in March 2018. In this test, he was able to catapult himself approximately 570 meters into the sky with his steam-powered projectile. He is still about 100 kilometers short of his ultimate goal.
The real question is, if he manages to fly high enough, will it be enough to convince him? In other words, will this experiment answer his question? That's what I'm curious about. He could still say, I went all the way up and I saw that the Earth is a disk. That's that. What is it about this experiment that would provide the information he needs to conclude the Earth is a globe? I can't say. Maybe one would have to send him around the Earth as an astronaut to truly give him the impression he is circling it and that he is seeing an actual sphere-like shape.
Followers of an irrational faith are no longer accessible by rational arguments. Whether it is the rejection of a spherical Earth or denial of the moon landing, common sense has no chance against these absurd theories. They are not founded on scientific or factual information. The internet and social media not only provide platforms for dissemination, they also fuel these alternative theories.
We can all surround ourselves with people who have a similar outlook on things. We're being offered a remarkable form of organization here that creates these filter bubbles. The filter bubbles lead to more presence and more clicks on the internet. Additionally, there are also algorithms and artificial intelligence, the so-called bots. They recognize that a topic has a real momentum, and they effectively fuel the fire. If someone joins in who is critical about the subject, the bots fuel the fire even further. They recognize that, wow, there's even a discussion here. There are now critical opinions, so we have to focus on it even further. As this momentum plays out, it's then amplified, amplified, amplified. Eventually, we come full circle. That's the point where we arrive at the so-called alternative theory. The alternative theory will always find disciples because it offers a simple solution. People crave simple solutions. This, in return, is reinforced again by the bots, and the wheel keeps on spinning. That's the ultimate problem of these filter bubbles on the internet, and that's the driving force of these alternative worldviews.
The view into space spurs curiosity and fantasy. People also associate the moon with madness. Moonlight can change our perception of reality. Both our lunar companion and the universe itself have always been the source for myths.
Is the Earth actually flat? Please believe me, in the future, when you look at the globe-shaped Earth as a space tourist, you will have no doubt that the Earth is round. Do flying saucers exist? Well, maybe at zero gravity on a space station. Other than that, it's complete nonsense. Did we go to the moon? Take my word for it as an astronaut. Of course we were there in the late 60s and early 70s. Allow me to offer the following summary. Tom Hanks once said that we are living in a society that has no law against making money through the means of stupidity and nonsense.
In 1950, during his lunch break, the physicist Enrico Fermi asked a simple question. Where is everybody? He wasn't talking about his friends or colleagues. He was referring to the absence of alien visitors. Are we actually alone in space? Venturing into space has answered many of our questions, but it has raised even more. It was also this step into space that gave rise to many myths and legends.